Adrien Arcand was born on October 3rd, 1899 and died on August 1st, 1967. He was the leader and founder of the National Unity Party of Canada, the Canadian National Socialist organization during the 1930s. The party had a short run, and unlike most fascist organizations of the time, it didn't really enjoy as much popularity. The NUP existed from around 1938 until it was ultimately banned in 1940, so not many Canadians know who Adrien Arcand was, or that the party itself even existed. In fact, I wager it really isn't well known in fascist circles today. This will be a very brief biography on Adrien Arcand, and if you guys ask, I will probably make a longer version and make more videos describing his philosophy and take on certain matters. I'll be quoting from Biographical Sketch, a short study of the life of Adrien Arcand. So let's get to it. His father, Narcisse Arcand, originally from Saint-Joseph de Deschambault, was a carpenter involved in trade union organizing. His mother, Marie-Anne Matou, came into the world as Sainte Marie de Beauce and made her name as school directress, organist, and mistress of the chapel. Adrien's parents had 12 children, Adrien being the fourth. In honor of his parents, Mr. Arcand wrote, "I owe to my highly intelligent and deeply Christian mother a principle that I find excellent, and a special taste for writing what I think. To an energetic and quite courageous father, a love of work which has been my best heritage, a measure of fighting spirit that some admire and others fault." Adrien was a student at St. Stanislaus School. He did his secondary studies at College de Saint-Jean and at College de Montreal. He began his philosophy at College Sainte Marie while studying evenings with the engineer Paul Degusse at the Forest Product Laboratory. The young Adrien wanted to become a chemical engineer. Unhappily, this scientific career plan was destroyed by illness. As of 1920, he earned his living as a journalist at La Patrie, at La Presse, and at the Montreal Star, mastering English as well as his mother tongue. In 1923, he was one of the founders and vice president of the Society of French-Canadian Authors. In 1924, after basic training, he obtained the rank of lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Militia with the Chateauguay Regiment, whose official emblem he designed along with his brother, Major Louis George Arcand. On April 14, 1925, he married Yvonne Guiguen of Quebec City. They had 3 sons together, Gilles, Adrien, Jean-Louis, and Pierre. While employed as a legal and theatrical columnist at La Presse, Mr. Arcand founded the Union of Catholic Journalists of Montreal. Assuming his presidency, management of the daily looked on the matter and moved to annihilate the union. Mr. Joseph Baudon, a veteran in the profession, tells the story of the events of 1929 as follows. Not having lived in proximity to Mr. Arcand in those years, there was a period when we saw one another, when we talked together daily, and I always appreciated his great qualities of heart and spirit. He was an honest man, and I can cite another fact for you. He had been fired from La Presse along with Harve Gagné. Now Harve Gagné and Adrien Arcand wanted to organize a journalists' union at La Presse and were fired because they refused to sign a document stating that they would not take part in a union. But Adrien Arcand and Harve Gagné told their colleagues, "Sign it, sign the papers, and don't leave. You don't have the means to leave your jobs." That showed a little the heart that Adrien Arcand had. He didn't want people to find themselves in the street because of him, because at that time, trade unionism wasn't very strong. Fired by La Presse after a decade of loyal service, reduced to counting on nothing but his talent and his work, Adrien Arcand launched a humorous and controversial weekly, Le Goglu, whose first issue appeared on August 8, 1929, almost the whole content of which he wrote, signing Emile Goglu. The success of the paper was mind-boggling. It quickly achieved a phenomenal print run of 85,000 copies sold. It was snatched up in the most remote villages. Old folks for whom the name of Adrien Arcand means nothing, nonetheless remember the Goglu. Meanwhile, Adrien Arcand engaged in battle against the creation of a Jewish school system with a confessional committee inside the Council of Public Instruction. At issue was a bill tabled by the provincial secretary, Athanase David, under the zealous care of MLAs Cohen and Berkovich. After taking this position, Mr. Arcand found in his mail a growing flood of correspondence from overseas, in particular Great Britain. He studied this documentation and acquired a solid conviction on the deep causes of the decadence of our Western Christian civilization, on the origin of the crisis, wars, revolutions, and tyrannies ravaging the world, on the root of evils being spread by high finance and communism. In November 1929, in the pages of the Guglu and other papers, he emceed The Camel and the Mirror. Mr. Arcand suggested the idea of organizing a vast nationalist movement. This is how, a few weeks later, the Patriotic Order of the Guglus went into operation to spread the doctrine that Mr. Arcand had elaborated. Since the task of defending our civilization against anti-Christian assaults seemed finally in straits within the framework of a simple movement, Mr. Arcand founded the National Socialist Christian Party, NSCP for short, in October of 1933. This was a bitter disappointment for a number of traditional political formations who had tried to woo him and attract him into their ranks. So right now you can see that Adrien Arcand built quite a good name for himself, that even existing traditional and nationalist political formations and parties wanted to attract him to their party, but yeah, that failed. Moving on. The NSCP took up the ideas of the preceding order. It had advocated corporatism, the social doctrine of the church, and participated in the current of the right, which crossed the west from the England of Mosley to the Belgium of de Grille, from Hitler's Germany to Mussolini's Italy. At the end of 5 years, after the necessity made itself felt of merging all the nationalist forces of the right into our country, the National Unity Party of Canada was formed. Meeting at Kingston on July 1st, 1938, the representatives of 8 different Canadian provincial political formations elected Adrien Arcand unanimously as leader of the new party. Mr. Arcand did not see this post of leadership as his exclusive privilege, but as a duty he would voluntarily have entrusted to another. Circumstances were such that he retained it until his death. A party national in scope, the NUPC broke definitely with the estrangement political jousting of the past. To federal Prime Minister R.B. Bennett, who had offered him the Minister of Labor portfolio in 1935, Adrien Arcand replied that blue and red parties were slated to disappear and that humanity would be confronted with the choice of being cut down by communism or of living free under an anti-communist regime. The NUPC embodied the option of a Canada free from the communist threat. Mr. Arcand had predicted it and had explained that it would be caused by anti-Christian forces, intending that the great Western nations, Germany, France, Great Britain, and Italy, tear each other apart to the advantage of international communism, which in fact happened. Faced with this cataclysm, Adrien Arcand demonstrated his unflinching loyalty to his country. To the government, he offered to incorporate his legionaries into the Canadian Army, which was declined. And as of February 1939, as reported in a newspaper hostile to the NUPC, the Gazette, Mr. Arcand has stated that the French Canadians would like to defend Great Britain if Italy attacked her unjustly. So here you can see that while Adrien Arcand was a fascist and agreed with other fascist figures such as Mussolini, he still stated that he would defend his nation from attacks from Italy. Now I kind of find it funny that he left out Germany and all this, but getting back to what I was saying, he was a nationalist first and foremost. Same if Germany invaded Italy, do you think Mussolini would just take it and be like, oh, nah, man, we're cool, man, we're fast bros. After all, communism is our real enemy, right? No, no, of course not. He would take every available steps to defend the country, and if he was able to repel them, he would march straight to Germany if he could. Not that Italy would, be strong enough to do that in real life, but you kind of get what I'm trying to say. This is sometimes I kind of see in the dissident movement nowadays. You see that just because two nations share the same ideology, that they would be sort of cool with each other, or that it would be okay to be collaborator for a foreign country against your very own. I mean, you kind of have to understand that in reality it won't be like that. If a foreign country is invading you, you cannot help them and expect your people to do the same. No, they would turn in and call you a traitor, and rightfully so. Uh, you just can't ask kiss, you know. Um, you can't call yourself a nationalist and then ally with a foreign nation, let alone a foreign nation that's invading you. You can make arguments about it. Sure, yeah, different. It's a different time. It's being a lot better than our current government. But the point is still stands. This really still stands. If you're a nationalist, then you made an oath to defend your land and border from any and all invaders. No questions asked. Yeah, that was a little rant, if you call it that such. So let's carry on. A responsible leader, concerned with the welfare of those who he had placed their confidence in him, he demonstrated the same attitude in the war as during the conflict with the management at Le Prez in 1929. He ordered suspension of the activities of the NUPC so as to not attract persecution. In the same spirit, he left his function at L'Illustration Nouvelle so the paper would not suffer the wrath of censor and be compelled to close its doors. So Arcand, even from an earlier age, was always a writer at heart. He wrote lots of content. They'd say that he sit down on a typewriter and like write for hours. That type of guy, which is cool. I'm a bookworm as well. It's just cool to show that fascists aren't just just stereotypical drugged up skinheads from like these, which, to be honest, they all come from like Hollywood. They're all caricatures of like '90s skinhead culture, skinhead gangs, which like just are degenerate and just don't represent National Socialist ideology and values at all. You know, these are the type of people that would be put to jail for nuisance, hooligan, if they lived in the 1920s, 1930s. They're just these type of people are just meant to scare other people away, to from actually researching and learning about fascist and national socialist philosophy. And it just goes to show you that he was well versed in literature and was an intellectual when it came for the cause. And I feel more people nowadays that are in the movement should be like that. And in addition to his regular work at Illustration Nouvelle, he still found time to collaborate on several other publications. The more the war advanced, the more it was evident that the agents of belligerency had the last word against those who sought to conclude a peace treaty. When the phony war turned to disaster for the Allies in the spring of 1940, a wind of panic blew across the countries of the Commonwealth. The alarm was sounded for the Nazi Fifth Column. Even L'Illustration Nouvelle, whose administration had been remodeled on February 15, 1940, threw itself into the atmosphere of hysteria, inviting its readers to obtain labels marked with the slogan, "Be Patriots, protect us from the Fifth Column." The scapegoats of the defeated Allies were all singled out, the parties of the nationalist right. Mr. Arcand knew in advance that he would be picked up. Hector Grennan, moreover, wrote, "In silence, the list of suspects had been extremely well prepared, and this apparently for some long time. Nobody has been insulted by being overlooked. Around this time, there was a big scare of the fifth column, which was essentially the World War II version of the Red Scare. People sought to undermine the country from within, either being a spy or providing funding or whatnot. Under this fear is that the government of Canada and the U.S. decided to lock up any Japanese, German, or Italian in fear of them collaborating with the enemy. They put them all in concentration camps, which, by the way, people do not know until the war was done. It's funny when you ask people, uh, it's funny when you ask Canadians, especially in my case, about these Canadian concentration camps, and they'll just look at you confused, like what are you talking about? But immediately know that Germans had concentration camps just by pure brainwashing. They just all they know is that the Holocaust, and German concentration camps and all that. And it's all just brainwashing and there's factual omission. There isn't anything wrong with that. I mean, there has been internment camps all throughout history. It's nothing new. That's just how war goes. They now starting to clamp down on fascists, and you'll see later on how that goes. Mr. Arcand could have fled, but he did not, because he had strictly nothing for which to reproach himself, as likewise his political adjuncts and his followers. Citing baseless rumors, they arrested him anyways, rumors skillfully spread by the enemies of the NUPC since before the war. Adrien Arcand and Maurice Scott were picked up the same day, May 30th, 1940, when the former was visiting in the Laurentines, 60 miles from Montreal, and the latter was in the city. Once again, the accused expected to have trouble, since on the preceding 23rd, federal, provincial, and municipal police had carried out a series of searches. Incidentally, on the same day, Sir Oswald Mosley, leader of the English fascists, was arrested in Great Britain. Very, very coincidental that both him and Mosley were imprisoned at the same time. Really makes you think. During a preliminary inquiry without tail or head, which was adjourned sine die, the equivalent of an acquittal, the NUPC was decreed illegal by order in council on the 4th of June, after which, with retroactive effect and without trial, the leaders of the NUPC were sent away to the Petawawa concentration camp. Adrien Arcand stoically endured the test. He would be deprived of his liberty for 5 straight years and 5 weeks, the longest internment of his kind in the whole British Empire. German, Italian, and Japanese Canadians and the other detainees who found themselves there, they were tossed into barracks, up to 85 prisoners lodging into buildings with a capacity of 48. There were no sanitary installations, only 2 big cauldrons near the camp beds. The barracks were constructed from a row of floors nailed to posts. They were poorly heated by 3 stoves which roasted the occupants nearest. The windows were barred after the morning wake-up. The detainees went to forced labor, and if they refused, they were locked in cells. On the back of each detainee there was a red disc. The installation visibly had been improvised, which made the pain of incarceration doubly intolerable. The detainees were the targets of endless harassment, above all which Ernest Lapointe was justice minister. The guards carved to pieces those packages the prisoners were able to receive, supposing espionage activities, which were utterly impossible. A medical examination took place every month, and they had to present themselves butt naked, as if men were cattle. During the first 18 months of his internment, Mr. Arcand was not allowed to see his wife. When this became possible, the conversation, under supervision of a guard, mandatory, transpired in English. Detainees who did not speak English, or their visitors, had to stay silent. At the same moment, war propaganda screamed to the French Canadians that they were fighting for the liberty to speak their language, to profess their religion, etc. In spite of the terrible injustice of which he and his party comrades were victims of, Mr. Arcand's conduct was always exemplary throughout his long internment. He strove to comfort desperate souls, innocent felled by judicial errors, the fathers of large families whose wives, considered as untouchables, cruelly suffered the absence of their husbands, the inexhaustible spiritual and moral resources of Mr. Arcand saved many prisoners from suicidal cul-de-sac. He collaborated with the penitentiary authorities to speed up the release of a number of detainees. So basically, Adrien was having a really crappy time. His party was banished, he had constant harassment and crappy living conditions in an internment camp, but he still took it with a strong spirit. He kept on moving and even helped others inside the internment camps who were suffering. That's a good trait to have when you're down. You pick yourself up, keep moving forward, and even help those around you too. You might even be able to influence them and set them on the right path. Even politics aside, anything really. On leaving the camp at Fredericton, Mr. Arcand established his residence at Saint Joseph de la Lanneray, a village skirting the Chemin du Roi, 40 miles north of Montreal. To clear his reputation of all suspicion, Mr. Arcand wanted to pass the test of a trial, the very one that had been promised to him but never instituted. His motion was dismissed, but Mr. Arcand's lawyer continued to work the file. A suit for $3,500,000 was directed against the federal government, which was backhandedly brushed off because His Majesty can do no wrong. Then Mr. Arcand reactivated the National Unity Party of Canada. He was a candidate in the federal election of 1949 in the riding of Richelieu-Verchères. On this occasion, Mr. Arcand was banished from the air on state radio. Mr. Arcand tried a second time to enter the House of Commons. In 1953, running in Baffier-Mascononge de la Noulière, the NUPC campaign was magnificent, unforgettable. However, the enemy inundated the riding with alcohol provided by a distillery under Zionist control. Mr. Arcand had to concede defeat by a small margin of 3,000 votes. In no way discouraged, Mr. Arcand set out to publish a monthly paper, Le United National, as of 1953. Mr. Arcand simultaneously continued his many activities as an author, a journalist, a political leader, and an expert on world problems, consulted from all parts, but his health has been permanently undermined by his stay in the concentration camp. He became very sick and spent the last months of his life confined to a hospital bed. Here are his last words, recorded by his bedside by our current leader, Mr. Gerald Langcott. Be true to God. Be true to country. Be true to family. Don't be concerned with what befalls you. Fear nothing. You will sometimes feel you are on a stormy sea. You will think you have been thrown off a bottomless precipice. You may feel you are alone. Don't give up. Defend the truth. Proclaim it. Shout it loud. God has given us the greatest of possessions, life, and it is necessary to give one's life in order to keep one's faith. Ask God to inspire you. The battle is so beautiful. The cause is so great. Persevere. Do not give up. Adrien Arcand rendered up his last breath on August 1st, 1967. So there you go, a rather brief essay on the life and times of Adrien Arcand and the National Unity Party of Canada. Although the movement was short-lived and his effect on Canada was rather minimal, he still persevered and presented a third position to the Canadian political theatre. What can we learn from him? He had a strong spirit, which helped him through personal turmoil and tribulation. When he was down, he picked others up with him. He was very resourceful and used his skills to the best of his ability to get the NUPC going. But what happened? Why didn't it pick up any steam, you might wonder? Well, there were lots of reasons, but I'll give a few and elaborate on them. Firstly, I think he pretty much did the same mistakes Commander Rockwell did a couple decades earlier, in that he used a lot of German fascist emblems and even used the swastika armband. Optic cucking aside, it's no wonder the government went after him and his party members during the war. He was literally wearing the enemy's emblems. Also, people don't want to be associated to a foreign ideology, let alone one the people have been thoroughly brainwashed to hate. If Canada were to ever embrace fascism or any first position philosophy in any way, it would have to be 100% Canadian, whatever that may be nowadays. Another reason why his party didn't get anywhere is because his policies were contrary to the Constitution of Canada, which most likely was the reason why the government used that as an excuse to intern him and temporarily banish his party. While he had a great passion and his heart was set in the right path, I feel these two things in particular came in the way of him getting any real major success in the Canadian political theater. Besides, he was a writer at heart, not a politician. That said, none of that takes away from any of his accomplishments. During the peak of the NUPC, it was able to attract around 4,000, even though that was a rather small feat compared to that of Mosley or even Codronu, and even received around 20 to 30% of the votes, which is no small feat either. Overall, sometimes you can have what it takes to make a change, but the system will always be in the way to screw things up. And the sad part is sometimes they can. But it only truly wins if you don't pick yourself up and keep moving, which is exactly what Adrien Arcand did.